You think you know Peter Griffin? Today we're diving into Peter's most shocking, messed up moment. So here's where things kick off. Peter's hanging out at the Drunken Clam with Cleveland, Quagmire, and Joe, and they're just doing what they usually do, chilling, drinking, and talking about whatever random things come up. Cleveland's wife, Loretta, calls him. Loretta checks in on Cleveland, asking the usual stuff, and Cleveland, as polite and calm as ever, answers her with total respect. Now to Peter, this whole scene just doesn't sit right. He thinks Cleveland's way too soft and lets Loretta boss him around. Of course, Peter doesn't keep this thought to himself. He starts teasing Cleveland about it, saying he needs to man up and stand up to Loretta. Joe and Quagmire join in, egging Cleveland on, and Cleveland just laughs it off like he always does. But Peter? He's on a mission now. In his mind, Cleveland needs to toughen up, and Peter's just the guy to make it happen. So, Peter gives Cleveland some advice on how to deal with Loretta, and if you know Peter, you know this advice isn't exactly practical or sane.
Going bam, 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 bam.
Peter, maybe...
Hey, hang on, I'm not done. Bam, bam, bam. And then she's all, oh yeah, bam, bam, bam.
Cleveland just nods along, but for Peter, this becomes a project. He has to get Cleveland to be a man. It's like Peter's got this weird responsibility to help Cleveland, even though no one asked him to. Fast forward a bit. Peter's out in the neighborhood, probably doing something random, when he hears some strange noises coming from Cleveland's house.
Hey, do you hear that?
What?
Sounds like someone's screaming.
But Peter, he's curious, way too curious. He decides he needs to investigate. So, he sneaks up to Cleveland's house and peeks through a window. And what does he see? Loretta and someone else. But not just anyone. It's Quagmire. Yeah, you heard that right. Cleveland's wife is with Quagmire. Peter can hardly believe it. His mind is racing, trying to process what he just saw. He's shocked, and for a split second, he considers keeping it to himself. Not exactly his strength. He runs off to find Cleveland, Joe, and the rest of the crew, bursting with the news he just found out. The moment he spills the beans, everything shifts. Joe's jaw drops, and Quagmire, realizing he's been exposed, tries to cover for himself, throwing out some weak excuses about it being a moment of weakness, or that he couldn't help himself. But Cleveland, he just stands there, frozen, processing what he's just heard. It's like a bomb just went off in his world. You see, Cleveland's always been the loyal, easygoing guy who doesn't cause any drama. But this news, it's more than just shocking. It's heartbreaking. His best friend and his wife betraying him like this. For Cleveland, this isn't just a betrayal. It's like his whole world is falling apart. In typical Peter fashion, he decides that the best way for Cleveland to deal with this is to fight Quagmire. Not talk, not work things out, not even take some time to process. Nope, Peter's solution is for Cleveland to throw down. So, he encourages Cleveland to get angry and take his frustration out on Quagmire. It's kind of wild to see Cleveland actually agreeing to this, but he's so hurt and furious that he decides to go for it. Cleveland and Quagmire square off, and for the first time, Cleveland actually fights back. Normally, he's the chill, passive guy, but now he's landing punches and letting out years of pent-up frustration. You can feel just how deep this betrayal cut him, and for a second you wonder, maybe Peter's plan wasn't entirely crazy. Maybe Cleveland really did need to stand up for himself, even if it's in this wild, physical way. The real turning point comes after Cleveland confronts Quagmire, but there's one more person he needs to talk to, Loretta. He goes to her, his voice barely hiding his pain, and asks the one question he's been dreading. Why? Why did she do it? Why would she betray him like this after everything they've been through? And Loretta's answer? It's brutal. She tells him he's just too boring, that he doesn't have the spark or excitement she wants in a partner. Imagine hearing that from the person you thought was your lifelong partner. Cleveland's devastated. He thought he was being a good husband by staying calm and respectful. He thought he was doing everything right. But now, he's standing there, hearing that his wife found him boring. It's a heartbreak on a whole different level, because Cleveland realizes there's nothing he can change to win her back. She's already made up her mind. Peter, watching this whole thing go down, starts to realize that maybe he's partly responsible for this mess. If he hadn't pushed Cleveland to be tougher, if he hadn't gone around telling everyone about Loretta's affair so quickly, maybe things wouldn't have escalated this way, as if it's just another crazy day in Quahog, getting to the next. It's just a normal day in the Griffin house, smarter than everyone else, even though his actions usually say otherwise. And it's not like his family hasn't noticed. Brian, the family dog, and surprisingly the voice of reason most of the time, rolls his eyes and throws in a sarcastic comment. Lois, Peter's wife, just gives him this, "Are you serious?" look. But Peter? He's all in. He's got this crazy confidence that convinces him he's going to blow everyone away with his genius score. So, without a second thought, he heads off to take the IQ test.
Wow, imagine what a genius like me could do with all that money. All right, Cloris Leachman, I've bought you legally. Now juggle these beanbags.
I don't know how to juggle.
God help you, Cloris, juggle the beanbags!
Getting worse. But the worst part? Peter isn't just embarrassing himself. He's embarrassing his whole family. Every time he pulls one of his stunts, it's like the entire Griffin family has to bear the consequences. Peter's completely oblivious to how his actions affect those around him and the options. You can almost feel the panic setting in. Peter realizes that his family means everything to him, and he's messed up so badly that he might lose them for good. Now kicks off to another episode with Peter doing something completely normal, just sitting at home flipping through channels. Now, Peter isn't exactly known for being calm or staying focused for too long, so he's rapidly changing channels, looking for something that'll grab his attention. Eventually, he stumbles upon a reality dating show. It's one of those overly dramatic shows where the contestants try to win the heart of some glamorous person, and as soon as Peter sees it, he's hooked. Peter's fully invested in this dating drama, watching contestants go on cheesy dates, argue, and try to stand out to win the heart of the bachelorette. Lois, Peter's wife, watches him from the kitchen, and she's just confused. She can't understand why Peter's so obsessed with this show. Meanwhile, Brian, the family dog, is just minding his own business. He's sitting there, doing his usual thing, looking cool, being sarcastic, and just trying to avoid whatever chaos Peter's about to create. But then Peter, in true Peter Griffin fashion, gets an idea that's totally out of left field. He suddenly thinks, hey, why not have Brian audition for this show? Now, Brian? He's not thrilled about this idea. He doesn't want to be a contestant on some cheesy dating show, especially one Peter's obsessing over. Brian's hesitant, maybe even a little embarrassed, but eventually he gives in, probably just to get Peter off his back. Next thing he knows, he's on set, surrounded by cameras, bright lights, and the whole setup of a reality show. The show begins, and Brian quickly realizes this whole setup is way more intense than he imagined. He's there in front of the cameras, and it's awkward at first. He's not used to being in the spotlight, especially not in this kind of setting. But here's the surprising thing. Brian actually starts to stand out. His laid-back attitude and sarcastic sense of humor make him different from the other contestants, who are all trying so hard to be charming or funny. Brian, meanwhile, is just being himself. Cool, calm. Brooke is exactly what you'd expect from a reality TV star. She's got the glamorous looks, the big personality, and she's definitely used to being the center of attention. But Brian by now has figured out the truth about Brooke. He realizes that she's more interested in the spotlight than in a real relationship, and he knows he can't go through with this charade any longer. Right before Brooke's big decision, Brian decides to pull her aside and have an honest conversation. He tells her that he thought there was something genuine between them, but he can't keep playing along if it's all just for the cameras. He explains that he wants something real, something meaningful, and he doesn't want to be part of this fake reality show drama anymore. Brooke, taken off guard, just kind of laughs it off. She brushes him off, saying, "Come on, Brian, it's just TV. This is all for fun." He decides to walk away from the show entirely. Picture it, every joke, every exciting moment, every little bit of drama, all either covered in pixelated squares or completely muted. Now, rather than shrugging it off like a normal person, Peter decides he's going to fix the problem himself. Yep, that's right. He decides to create his own TV network, which he calls PTV. Think about that for a second. This is Peter Griffin we're talking about. So, PTV takes off, and pretty soon, it's the talk of the town. Peter's hosting some seriously wild programming, with no filters, no bleeping, and no limits. It's like every bizarre, over-the-top idea he's ever had is suddenly on display for everyone in Quahog. There are absurd game shows, shocking talk segments, and of course, Peter's signature crude humor everywhere you look. For a while, it's like Peter's actually managed to give people what they didn't know they wanted. But as the network's popular just say, it's definitely not family-friendly. Even Brian, the family dog, is shocked by some of the things he sees on PTV, and that's saying something. He watches in horror as Peter's stunts just keep getting more offensive and bizarre by the day. Now, he's not just ignoring the FCC, he's practically inviting them to come after him. The more the FCC cracks down, the more Peter seems to dig his heels in. It's like watching a kid who's been told not to touch something, and now that's the only thing they want to do. He fights, the harder the FCC cracks down, and they take things to a level Peter never expected. So now the FCC isn't just focused on Peter's network anymore. People are getting censored for saying basic, everyday stuff, and it turns the whole town into a confusing, laughable mess. Imagine being in a restaurant, trying to order a sandwich, and the waiter's response is filled with bleeps and cut-off words. It's like living in a cartoon version of a dystopian future. At this, are fed up, and they're all looking at Peter as the one who caused this chaos. Even Lois, who's usually the one person lasting impression on everyone, himself included. It's a lesson in how sometimes, just sometimes, having a few boundaries isn't the worst thing in the world. If you thought that was wild, wait until you hear what happens next. Brian's feeling a little lost and restless, like something's missing in his life. He's hanging out around the house, nose buried in a book, but even that isn't really distracting him from this feeling. Brian, as we know, is different from everyone else in the Griffin family. He's well-read, a bit of a deep thinker, and he takes pride in being smarter than the average dog. But there's one big thing that's been haunting him. He never finished college. Then, during one of their usual back-and-forth conversations, Peter makes a throwaway comment about how Brian gave up on college. And just like that, the words hit Brian harder than he expected. He tries to shake it off, but it sticks in his mind. He feels like there's unfinished business, that he left something really important behind. And suddenly, he's dead set on going back to school to finally earn that degree. With a new sense of determination, Brian decides to head over to the admissions office at Brown University, where he originally studied. He's nervous, but he feels ready to take this step. But as soon as he walks in, he realizes it won't be easy. When he tells the admissions staff that he's a former student who wants to come back, they're skeptical, to say the least. They've never had a dog apply, let alone one that's returning to complete a degree. The staff members keep throwing obstacles at him, questioning his commitment, and reminding him that he dropped out before. But Brian doesn't back down. He argues his case, promising he's serious and won't quit this time. After some back and forth, they finally decide to give him another shot. So, Brian's officially a college student again. At first, he's thrilled. He's back in class, taking notes, and feeling like he's really doing something worthwhile. But it doesn't take long for the reality to sink in. College isn't easy, especially when you've been out of it for a while. The assignments are piling up, the reading load is huge, and every day feels like a marathon of stress and deadlines. Brian's quickly overwhelmed, but he's determined to keep pushing forward. And then, as if things weren't hard enough, Peter decides to support Brian in his own special way. He shows up at Brown, completely uninvited, ready to help Brian succeed. Now, we all know that Peter isn't exactly the picture of focus and maturity. Instead of actually helping Brian, he's causing one distraction after another. Peter treats Brian's college experience like a free vacation for himself, roaming around campus, cracking jokes, and even trying to squeeze himself into Brian's classes. Brian's already struggling, and Peter's constant interruptions are only making things worse. Brian starts to lose patience as Peter's antics get more ridiculous. Imagine this. Brian's trying to study in his dorm, surrounded by textbooks and papers, barely keeping up with his assignments. And then, in comes Peter with a huge grin, acting like it's party time. He's loud, he's clueless, and he has no understanding of how much pressure Brian's under. Peter even drags Brian to campus parties, completely ignoring the fact that Brian's got exams to study for and assignments due. Every time Brian tries to focus, Peter finds a way to mess it up. At one point, Peter even sits in on one of Brian's classes, making a complete spectacle of himself, laughing at things that aren't supposed to be funny and distracting everyone. Brian's mortified, realizing that his dream of a second chance is quickly turning into a nightmare. The stress starts to pile up, and Brian finds himself buried in work, barely able to keep up. He's pulling all-nighters, drinking way too much coffee, and stressing over every little assignment. The pressure's getting to him, and his grades are slipping fast. He feels like he's falling behind, like he's losing control, but he doesn't want to admit it. For Brian, this isn't just about finishing college. It's about proving to himself that he can do it. He doesn't want to be seen as a quitter, especially not after making such a big deal about coming back. But deep down, he's starting to wonder if he made a mistake. Then, everything reaches a breaking point. Brian's got a huge exam coming up, and it's his last chance to prove he's capable of handling the workload. He's spent days cramming for it, trying to absorb every bit of information he can. He knows this test is make or break. If he fails, he's out. So, He's studying harder than ever, shutting out distractions, and trying to focus on nothing but this exam. A few days later, Brian gets his results. He finds out that he passed the exam, and the relief is overwhelming. For Brian, this isn't just a passing grade. It's proof that he's capable, that he can finish what he started. Peter, who's actually proud of Brian for once, pats him on the back and tells him he always knew he could do it. It's a moment of victory. Alright, so here's where it all kicks off. Peter else have something better. So what does he decide? Instead of just buying a better sound system, family like it's some amazing discovery. Lois, though, is horrified. She tells him to put it back and warns him not to mess around with things like this. But Peter being finish this backyard movie theater. But then, strange things start happening around the house. The family is in total panic mode. They search everywhere, calling for him, but there's no sign of him. The family decides they need help. They bring in a medium named Madame Claude, a mysterious woman who claims she can communicate with spirits. She walks around the house with incense, chanting and trying to cleanse the space. But as soon as she starts, the spirits get angrier. Objects start flying around, strange sounds fill the air, and it becomes clear that whatever's haunting their house isn't going to leave without a fight. Peter, thinking he's still in control, tries to handle it his own way. He grabs a spirit seem to get even more hostile. Brian, the family dog, finally suggests that they might need to return the skull to its original burial site. Maybe, just maybe, if they put it back, the spirits will leave them alone. The problem? Peter has no idea where he actually found it. The backyard is now a mess of dirt piles and holes because Peter kept digging in different spots after he found the skull. They're all stressed, exhausted, and blaming Peter for getting them into this mess. Just when things seem like they can't get any worse, the ground. While Peter may have learned a lesson about respecting things that shouldn't be disturbed. Hit subscribe or check out the next video.